What does it mean that we should see ourselves as if we went out of Egypt? Okay, great. I consider myself to have gone out of Egypt. What good does that do for me as an individual, as a human being? What is the idea of Pesach in general, of the Haggadah specifically? What does it mean to see yourself as if you went out of Egypt? What is Egypt, and what exactly are we getting out of? Also, there's a contradiction here. First it says, and every generation of Persians should see himself or herself, kilu hu yatsa mitzrayim, as if he or she went out of Egypt. That means that I need to personally see myself as if I went out personally. Later on, the Haggadah says, not only us, our forefathers did God redeem, but also us. As it says, God took us, v'hotanu hotzi misham. We all, as we might say in the South, went out of Egypt. Which one is it? Is it a personal exodus, that I went out of Egypt? I need to see myself as if I went out of Egypt? Or is it a communal effort that I need to see myself as part of an entire community who came out of Egypt? Which one is it? The Sfas Emes, one of the great Hasidic Rebbes of all time, the second Gerer Rebbe, Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh Leib, who preached in the late 1800s, the early 1900s, the great Rebbe of Ger. He has a number of comments each year. Each year he would talk to his Hasidim, and he'd record some notes on what he said that year. And the next year he'd say new ideas and add more. I'd like to put together all of the thoughts of this Gerer Rebbe on this particular question that he said in the spanning about 30 years. In 1871, he writes that there's this two-step process. First, you have to, by being a believing, practicing Jew, you include yourself in the entire community. You connect yourself with that generality known as Am Yisrael, Klal Yisrael, the entity of the spiritual community of Israel, Knesset Yisrael, the congregation of Israel. That's one sort of Geula. In that sense, I'm Jewish, I'm part of the Jewish Exodus experience. That's one. But then there's a second step. I need to see myself bifrat, in particular, as having gone out of Egypt. The reason that the Haggadah seems to contradict itself and speak firstly of a collective, of a particular Exodus, and then of a collective one, is that there are, in fact, two ideas of Exodus, two concepts which I need to grasp as I grapple with the meaning of Pesach. The idea that I'm part of the Jewish people in general, that's easier to understand. If I'm a chacham, if I'm a wise man, if I've studied a little bit of the Torah, then we know that. We know that we're part of the Jewish people. The Jewish people went out of Egypt on Pesach, on Passover. What's afilu kulan chachamim, says the Rebbe, even if we're all very wise, what we might not realize, and what we might require further reflection and thought, is what does it mean that I went out of Egypt? What's my personal exodus? My personal journey that takes me out of my personal Egypt and makes Pesach meaningful for me. That's the second step. And that, says the Haggadah, afilu lanu chachamim. Even if we're all very wise, we understand the concept of our connectedness to Israel, we may not fully grasp what my personal Exodus story was. That takes more reflection. One of the big themes that the Sfas Emes emphasizes is the notion of timelessness. The notion that a Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkos, Purim, each time stirs up certain mystical feelings, mystical experience, and mystical potential in every time. What's the mystical potential of Pesach? He says that what we want to be able to relive is our own personal exodus. We want to be able to relive the ability to get out of our Mitzarim. Mitzrayim is a country, and it also refers to Mitzarim, straits, difficulties, challenges. When we get out of our personal challenges, we have met our personal exodus. Then we have to get out of them, and then we have an exodus, a Yetziat Mitzrayim, a getting out, a redemption from Egypt. He says elsewhere that getting out of your personal Egypt means to get out of your sitra achra ba'avodat habore. There are certain interferences. Perhaps in the webcast you can have interference. In our religious life, there can also be interference. And those interferences that get in the way of my full religious life, that Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, that's what I need to redeem myself from. That's what I need to get out of. That's what it means to have a personal exodus. Seeing what it is that stands between me and a higher religious plateau and plane. If I can solve that, I can have a new exodus. And that feeling that it's the time, it's the right time, mystically speaking, this is the right time for it. It's Pesach season now. Today is Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first of the month of Pesach, the month of redemption. That means that at the Seder night, the potential to have a new exodus is greater. You can always return to God, but Pesach has the extra spiritual potential. He took us out then, and we can be part of that new exodus even today as well. This notion that we can have our personal exodus can be taken to a further degree. You can picture that as the Jews went out of Egypt, they went out as a great mass, millions of people leaving Egypt. They're one organic body, the nation of Israel. You can also picture individuals, individual faces, not just an impressionistic view of the Exodus, but a particular view, the face of one individual and what it means for him or her to leave the land of their affliction. But you can also picture as the Jews were splitting the sea, God split the sea. Recall the Midrash that was Nachshon ben Aminadav. It was a particular Jew who jumped into the sea, and the sea split for him. If you take this Midrashic idea one step further, there was the Midrash that each one of the 12 tribes has a different path through the sea, made just for them. The 12 tribes represent 12 different Jewish personalities, 12 different human personalities. And in that sense, every human personality had their own exodus. Actually, physically, during the splitting of the sea, there were 12 different splits, one for each type of person, each one of the tribes. Take it a step further, as the Sfas Emes does, this great Gerer Rebbe does, there was a Kriyas Yamsuf, there was a splitting of the sea for every single person. Everyone faces that wall of the water where you can't go any further. And everyone can crack through that mass of water and make their own personal exodus. So it's not just the story in general, or my story of today, which is personal, but we can read back into the story of the Exodus and the high point, the apex, the great moment of the splitting of the sea as a moment when there was a personal exodus in addition to a communal exodus. 12 different crossings, 600,000 different crossings, millions of different crossings and splittings of the sea. This notion that every individual has their own pathway to heaven is found in one of the ideas of another great mystic, the Ari, lived about 500 years ago. Rabbi Isaac Luria, he wrote that there are 12 gates of prayer. There are really 12 different paths to God, pathways to heaven, so to speak, paths of prayer. And that as I find my words for my prayer, I get hopefully onto the right path, the right road, and with that I drive my prayer to heaven, to God Himself.